Hello, welcome to the OSU Sports Extra podcast. I'm Patrick Prince, joined as always by Dean Ruhl, who's in Stillwater. We're coming at you on Wednesday, January 25th. Got a couple things to get into, Dean, and we're going to get into all of it after a quick break. All right, so Dean, we got a defensive coordinator in Stillwater now. Let's just I'm not sure where to start with that. So Bryan Nardo was hired from Gannon University, an small Division II university in Erie, Pennsylvania. Your thoughts on the hire?
Patrick, I'll put it out there, and I always like to read the Twitter comments and kind of see what the pulse of the fan base is at. And it was pretty divided yesterday. I think you had some people really against the hire, and then you had some who maybe not so much liked the hire, but trusted Mike Gundy with this one. So I'll probably be in the minority here when I say I like this hire, Patrick. I really do, because it checks off, I think, a lot of the boxes that OSU wanted to check off. I think first and foremost, they wanted a long-term solution at the defensive coordinator position. When I say long-term, 5 years.
Right. Yeah.
Because I think, and we talked about this a week or two ago when we talked about Derek Mason, that it always looked like a short-term option on paper. It didn't look like it was going to be a long-term thing. And so in that regard, I think Nardo checks off that box right away. When you're taking somebody from a D2 college, I think they are more apt to stick around a little longer. I think another plus is you've got a guy who's young, and this kind of got lost in the mix yesterday, Patrick, but this guy was a part of a summit, whatever you want to call it, the American Football Coaches Association, the AFCA. They, I guess, every year put together a kind of a coaching summit called 35 under 35. Anybody who knows Forbes, it's the same idea of 40 coaches or 35 coaches under 35 years of age, and he was a part of that, Patrick. And you can see, well, what does that really mean? So I spent a little bit of time last night going through those 35 coaches who were a part of that and where they are now. I probably got through about half of them, and each one has had a job promotion, Patrick. Each one, as if they were at a D2 level, they've since moved up to D1. They were at a D3, they've moved up to D2, and they were a D1 kind of specialist coach. They were in a bigger role. So don't get that. Don't look at D1 and Gannon University and say, oh, this guy can't. Talent comes in a lot of shapes and sizes and forms in football.
Right. Yep.
And on that, 35 under 35 list, Patrick, somebody that, for all the folks listening in Tulsa, there's somebody that all the Tulsa people were really excited wanting the university to hire Brennan Marion. Do you remember that name, Patrick? He was over down in Texas as the wide receivers coach. He's now the offensive coordinator over at UNLV. So there's talent on this list, and I think this is a good benchmark to tell what kind of a person we're dealing with, talent level and kind of smarts wise. And so I think that checks off a third box, that checks off a second box. The third box being Mike Gundy's always seemed to like this 3-3-5 defensive scheme. And so for those who are unsure what that is, that's going to be what you've seen at OSU over the past few years is a 4-2-5 scheme. So that's 4 defensive linemen, 2 linebackers, and 5 defensive backs. This is now 3 defensive linemen, 3 linebackers, and 5 defensive backs. And when you think of a 3-3-5 in the Big 12, you're going to think of Iowa State's defense and all that. And Mike Gundy's never shied away, or since I've been covering him. Whenever they play Iowa State, he always brings up that Iowa State defense and how good it is, and he loves John Heacock up there and the Cyclones defensive coordinator. So I'm not surprised that he went after something like that, because I think he's always been fond of it, and with 3-3-5, you're more apt to it's designed in emphasizing stopping the pass. Obviously, it's going to stop the run as well, but all those things kind of come together, Patrick. And I think that when you check off a lot of those boxes, I don't think OSU really gave a crap where this guy was coming from. It could have been a D3, I think, for all Mike Gundy cared. When you check off all those things, I think that's what this hire comes from. And obviously, as has been talked about a lot, Mike Gundy doesn't really care where you're coming from, because look at Mike Yurcich.
Yeah, that's the obvious comparison, right? You know, nobody knew Mike Yurcich a number of years ago. That turned out pretty well. Where is he these days? Mike
So
Yurcich?
he's at Penn State. So
Okay.
he went from OSU, he went to Ohio State
Right.
and Texas, spending the season there, and then he's going into season number 3 at Penn State as their offensive coordinator.
Okay. So, you know, it's only been one, but, you know, Gundy has a track record of hiring coach assistants from kind of the lower level, and it turning out pretty well. Okay. So you like the hire. That's some interesting points. Okay.
Yeah.
You've got a story coming. We're filming this on a Wednesday. You've got a story coming for the Thursday paper, correct?
We'll have something out in tomorrow's paper and Friday's paper.
Okay. So, I mean, you've been doing a lot of research, a lot of digging. What else have you kind of dug up about this guy? What's interesting about him?
Well, Patrick, I think
Well, hold on, Nate. Before you get into that, when you were referencing earlier the under 35, so how old is he?
so he's 37.
Okay, so now he's 37. Okay, so obviously still a young guy. Okay.
Exactly. And you know, I think it's really weird, Patrick, when we talk about a coordinator or a coach hire, you know, we kind of live in a world where you're supposed to be able to, you know, have the instant answer. Is this guy going to work? Is he not going to work? And I think with Bryan Nardo, it's going to be years before we know that answer. Years before we know if this was a good hire, because even at this time next year, when he's had a full season under his belt, how much stock can we put in that? Because these aren't going to be his players. He's going to be trying to completely overhaul this entire, you know, defense. So how many years are we going to look at Jim Knowles, Patrick? If we would have judged Jim Knowles in his first season at OSU and said, this is what his career is going to be, you would have said he sucked. You know, I mean, like, just to be frank, you would have said those numbers are not good. This defense was not good. But, you know, by year 4, when he had his players in, he had his system in, he had everything, you know, down to his science, and players were buying in. Obviously, everybody was so upset to see Jim Knowles go. And so that's why I say this is going to be a process. And as much as we want to know the answer, is this going to work? Is this not going to work? I just don't think we can answer that properly at the right time. But I think we can look at some other things, and we can look at what he did at Gannon University. And while the numbers aren't spectacular, when you look at what he did in a year, because if you thought the numbers were rough this year, let's see, Patrick, I got them pulled up. I'll list a couple of them off for you. You know, you've got a team that he came in, they were allowing almost 400 yards of offense a game. He lopped off more than 100 yards of that, going from about 393 down to 287 yards per game defensively. So that's a 100-yard improvement right there. Mm-hmm. In terms of you know, turnovers, the decent numbers, 3 sacks a game, that ranked high in Division II football, 7 tackles for loss a game. You know, when you look at what Gannon was the year before he came over, and then the year he had at Gannon, those were major improvements in a lot of those statistical categories, Patrick. And then I think the most telling of what he's capable of doing is looking at what he did over at Emporia State in Kansas, because he had 8 years there, and by the end of it, they were having 40 sack seasons. They averaged 26 turnovers a season, Patrick, under him.
26 a season?
A season, yeah. That was their average during his tenure. They were able to force 26 turnovers. So I think the point I'm making is, when you look at kind of one stop where he's been able to really implement what he wants to implement, let's look at Emporia State and what he's been able to do. And, you know, they went on to win their first ever playoff game. And that team's been around since 1893, apparently. And under him, they won their first playoff game ever. So I think that's something to look at. But then trying to learn a little bit about Bryan Nardo, the person. Something that I've been able to learn is that he has an innate sense of understanding players and getting them to buy in. This is something that talking with some people who've known, and we'll have a story on this Friday, Patrick, in our Friday print Thursday afternoon. We'll have a story on this. Just kind of, he has that innate sense to kind of understand his players, understand what they need, and be able to buy into what he's selling. And I think obviously that's going to be super important, Patrick, because I don't care how much smarts you have. If you don't have, if the players don't believe in you, this is not going to work out. So I think overall, I heard he's a Dallas Cowboys fan too, Patrick. I don't know if that gets people fired up or not, but all that. So we'll have a whole story on that, but he has, again, all the intangibles you want in a coach or defensive coordinator. And I like the hire, Patrick. I might be in the minority there.
All right. Well, we'll see. Like you said, time will tell. All right. Excuse me while I clear my throat live on air there. Man, I just did it again. Let's talk a little hoops. So OSU had a really good win against Iowa State last Saturday, setback last night at Texas. We're kind of getting to the point of year where every game counts, every game matters. Where does OSU basketball stand today in terms of possible tournament prospects?
Well, if you put stock into what Joe Lunardi says in his weekly bracketology on ESPN, he says OSU's in the first 4 out category. So that put him around number 70 in the field of 68. So there's still some work to do, and Texas is losing to Texas last night is going to bump them down a smidge. I wouldn't say it drops them terribly, because Texas is a team that is fighting for a number 1 seed still. Yeah, you're running out of time, Patrick. I'm officially putting the clock on. You are running out of time if you're going to make the tournament. Ole Miss, if they lose to Ole Miss on Saturday, then things get really dicey, in my opinion. And that's going to be the Remember the 10 game. I will say, against Texas, they showed a lot of signs of what allowed them to win against OU and Iowa State this past week, and that's the up-tempo offense, moving the ball faster. I think Woody Newton has been vital in them being able to open up this offense, because he is that stretch 4, kind of forward who plays like a guard, but he's 6'9". He's been vital in kind of going a little small ball, keeping the tempo up, getting shots up. And so you saw that against Texas, and they were really, they stayed in there for a little bit. The problem is, Patrick, and I think this is going to be a killer, is closing out halves is always tough on them. I wrote about it from last night. Bryce Thompson hit this big 3 to cut their deficit down to 2 with 4 minutes left in the first, and they didn't score for the final 4 minutes. Texas to bump up their lead, carried into the half, come out of the half, and they were able to just kind of, anytime OSU had momentum, they just kept pushing back. They also ran into a ton of foul trouble last night. That's not helpful against Texas. So yeah, I'm saying, I'm turning the clock on. I'm saying you're running out of time. They need probably another signature win or 2. They need another win, Iowa State caliber win. If they get that, they won't win the games they're supposed to win. Then yeah, they're a tournament team, but they still need that one more win, Patrick, in my opinion.
And then, of course, after Ole Miss is Bedlam the following Wednesday in Norman. That just feels like they played Bedlam the other day. So, you mentioned that Saturday's the Remember the 10 game, and when that happened in 2001, OSU vowed to always remember the 10, and they've really, really done that. They've always honored the 10 every year. They've really done exactly what they said they were going to do. What are they doing this Saturday?
I think they're doing their normal setup. I haven't heard anything. They always do something special during during halftime, during pregame. I haven't heard anything about what that is, but no, you're 100% correct, Patrick. There will be something special. They will remember the 10. I think it has been one of the more respectable things OSU's done every year is making sure this gets acknowledged and taken care of.
How old were you in 2001?
One.
I mean, I'm curious, what does that mean to you? I mean, you and I are quite a bit different in age, and I was actually working that night for the Stillwater News Press in 2001, and I knew a couple of those people on that plane. But for someone like yourself, what's and you're like me, you were a student. We both went to OSU, so there's that. What does that mean to you? Kind of someone from a younger generation.
So not only a younger generation, Patrick, but I didn't grow up in Oklahoma. So when I eventually did move to Oklahoma and you learn about it and you hear about it, I think one of the most important pieces of journalism I've ever read was a Rick Riley article, Patrick.
Yeah.
The back cover of Sports Illustrated.
Yeah.
I think it was a week or two after the plane crash. He wrote, it was probably 25 inches of copy on it, right? And I just think it's the most just raw telling. It was centered around their following away game. They were trying to decide if they were going to fly or drive it. I think it was against Iowa State. They were trying to decide if they were going to fly or drive it, and just telling that story. And hearing, firsthand accounts from like people yourself and Tom Dorado, Patrick. I'm sure you know Tom. Him telling his story of all that stuff. I think it's super necessary that days like Saturday come around, because it's so important to tell those people's stories and just tell the story of it and make sure people remember it.
Yeah, no doubt about it. All right, before we get out of here, let's talk a little wrestling. You went to a duel. Remind me, which duels you go to?
Was out at Gallagher on Friday for Northern Colorado.
Northern Colorado, that's right. Tell us about that. How'd that go?
I think this is your typical Cowboys team. They're elite. They're in the top level. I don't think John Smith is happy. He's probably happy with the team. But I think John Smith wants a national contender every year, and rightfully so. This is what this program is built up, and Dayton Fix is doing what he's supposed to do at 133. Patrick, you got Travis Whitleg doing what he's supposed to do at 184. Dustin Plott at 175. Serber at 90. I think those upper weights have really kind of solidified themselves. Those 174 on. The problem weight, 141, I think you'd like to see a little more from Carter Young. He's 6-8 on the season, and he wrestled the number one guy at his weight on Friday, and that's why that going out to that match was so important to me, because I wanted to see, how did he look there against the number one guy. And John Smith even said at post game, it shows you there's a lot of work he still has to do to be competing at the top level. So I think, especially with this being in Tulsa this year, Patrick, I think the story is going to be Dayton Fix, who's finished runner-up now 2 consecutive years at 133, and he's on a crash course again to end up in that national championship against Roman Bravo Young. So you've got a solid team. I think they're ranked. They just moved up, I think, to number 10 yesterday. I didn't spend too much time reading it because Bryan Nardo had just been hired, but I think OSU moved up to number 10 in team rankings, and it's a good team. I think John Smith's want them to compete a little more and really get ready for that run in Tulsa.
Yeah, for sure. And I appreciate you saying that about reminding folks that the BOK Center is hosting the National Wrestling Championships. That's March, early March.
So Tulsa is going to be a hub in March for wrestling, because you'll have the Big 12 Conference Championships that first weekend in March. I think it's the 4th and the 5th.
That's right.
Then,
yeah.
you'll have national championships at the BOK the 16th to the 18th of March.
Very
So
nice.
3 day Madness is what they call it, Patrick.
I love it. Love it. Love the catchphrases. All right. Anything else on your mind you want to share?
I think we're good, Patrick.
All right, we'll end it there. We appreciate you checking us out. Dean and I come at you once a week, usually in the middle of the week. You can check us out for free on Google, Apple, or Spotify. We appreciate you listening, and Dean, we'll catch up next week.
For sure.